Hello, sleepyheads. Tonight we wander into households of ancient Egypt, where marriages were inked on papyrus, sealed with bread and beer, and governed by rules so practical they feel almost modern, and yet strange enough to make the lamplight flicker. What poets call timeless love, and wanderers call mystical union, the scribes reduced to clauses. Who keeps the linen? Who keeps the geese? And what happens when affection drifts like silt on the Nile? Before settling into this quiet tangle of vows and ledgers, offer a small nod to Matt. Tap like and subscribe if these cozy histories helps the eyes grow heavy. And whisper in the comments from which corner of the world and what are the stars keep time there. It's a comfort to imagine this circle stretching from delta to desert. Now lower the lanterns. Let a fan hum like river reeds in evening wind. Set a clay cup by the bedside, a reed pen upon a folded cloth, a small basket of dates within reach. And let us drift into tonight's tale, the strange rules of marriage in ancient Egypt, spoken softly enough to cradle sleep, yet vivid enough to linger like perfume on linen by dawn. The marketplace keeps its own calendar. Rightness and rumor decide the hour, not the sun. A flute phrase drifts over the courtyard, thin as smoke and just as sure of its path. A girl with braided hair tilts her head so the lotus oil can catch the light. The scent rises warm and sweet, a small crown for an ordinary afternoon. A baker cracks open the oven mouth. Barley bread exhales steam and salt into the air, a smell that could make even the gods look down for a moment. On a low stool in the shade, a reed pen scratches over papyrus, tally marks marching, jars of beer, bolts of linen, a silver ring that will be weighed, tested, and tucked back into a cloth bundle that looks heavier than it is. The pen sounds like sand on stone, patient, certain, business breathing in and out. Affection is not illegal here, just inconvenient. A boy lingers by a heap of figs and chooses the same fruit twice, pretending to judge sweetness, actually measuring courage. The girl pretends not to look, then looks anyway, fingers grazing the rim of a water jar like she could tune its surface to his voice. Love poems in Egypt have a different address, not temples, not palaces, but doorways and edges of stalls. Song lines murmured, where hands already know what they want to do. The songs are brief and exact, eyes that are fish in a river, breath that smells like freshly baked bread, wrists that shine like faience at noon. Desire speaks in images that can be held, not metaphors that float away. Then there are the parents. They never float. They arrive with numbers, with a memory of last year's flood line, with a scale for weighing promises. The mother's thumb presses a linen hem to test the weave. The father nods at jars like they are sentences he is willing to hear. Marriage is a house before it is a kiss, a threshold before it is a song, and the threshold must be swept, measured, blessed by common sense. A man does not marry until he has a roof of his own, even a humble one, and enough grain to promise that mornings will not begin in an empty bowl. Love is invited to the talk, but it sits at the back, polite, waiting for a place to speak. Children of Egypt learn to read faces early, not just hieroglyphs. The boy watches the angle of the father's shoulders, how high they are, whether they loosen as the tallies grow. The girl listens for the scratch of the pen, a rhythm that could mean comfort later, or arguments by lamplight. She knows her name will not change, that she will carry herself into a new house as herself, wife of so and so, but still who she was. This is a country that lets women keep their names, their contracts, their jars. The rules are strict and strange, but not always cruel. Courtship likes to pretend it is a festival. It is not. It is a negotiation with music. The flute keeps playing in the courtyard, high notes stepping lightly over the dust, while gifts are counted, while a small ring rolls from palm to palm and warms to the skin of whoever is brave enough to hold it. The ring is not a vow so much as a circle drawn around to lives, a shape that says we will meet here again tomorrow, and the day after that. Rings are easy to lift, houses are not. So everyone glances at the doorway to the boy's home, a rectangle of shadow where future mornings will happen, ordinary and miraculous. There is always a poem hiding in the business. Even the pen knows it. It pauses sometimes, just a heartbeat, as if it can hear the girl laugh at nothing, as if the scratch of ink would interrupt. The mother notices the pause. She smiles without showing it. She remembers her own courtyard, the smell of bread, the oil on her wrists, the exact way the sunlight caught the rim of the water jar on the day someone asked for her. The father remembers less poetry, more measures of grain, the weight of bolts stacked like silent judges. He is not heartless, he is cautious, which is a father's way of loving out loud. Songs thread the marketplace like thin cords, and sometimes they catch. A line from last year is still stuck to a wall in someone's head. The one about the girl whose eyes were fish, and how they fled when she was angry. It makes the boy grin at the wrong moment, his courage trip on its own feet, and the girl rescue it by asking if the figs are ripe enough to stain a thumb. Little rescues like that are the true beginning of a marriage. Not the contract, not the feast, but the shared habit of saving each other from small embarrassments. Egypt understands this, which is why the contracts list tangible things and leave the delicate work to the people who must do it daily. The reed pen goes back to work, careful, tireless. It writes what can be proved later. The jars she will keep if the house breaks, the cloth that will remain hers, the copper that will walk away with her if walking away is what must be done. Divorce is not forbiddance. It is simply untidy, like a basket that refuses to sit flat. The contract builds walls inside the basket so things do not roll out into the street. In this, the parents are generous in a practical way. They make sure a future version of their daughter is not hungry. The boy's parents nod at this too. They know that fairness prevents small quarrels from turning into curses. Somewhere behind the courtyard, a neighbor taps a jar with a fingernail, and the pitch tells her whether it will keep beer sweet for a week. She listens with her ear, with her throat, with the old part of the mind that knows clay like kin. The girl listens to the same pitch, then looks back at the ring. She tries it on, not to keep it, just to feel the idea of weight. cool metal warming to skin, a shy circle closing. The boy watches the ring slide home. His breath stutters once, then settles. They both pretend the ring is too small and must be rubbed with oil. They both pretend they have not already measured each other by how they stand in the afternoon sun. The parents step aside, a courtesy and a test. The couple speaks softly about small things that mean everything. Bread from this oven or that one. Whether the shade in his doorway is deep enough at noon. Whether the water jar sweats in the heat or stays cool if wrapped in damp cloth. These are declarations with different names. I want to wake up where you wake up. I want the ordinary to be ours. The flute slips into a lower register, a few notes like stepping stones across a narrow stream. It is possible to cross here without wetting the hem. It is also possible to fall in and laugh. When the talk returns to the table, it is the father who clears his throat. His nod is small, but in a courtyard nods are loud. The reed pen finishes a line and lays down like a tired insect in the shade of the inkstone. The baker's second tray arrives and fills the air again with that fragrant certainty that life will continue. Bite after bite. The girl flexes her fingers. The oil shines at her wrist like a tiny sun. The boy lifts the bundle of gifts just to feel their pull. Cloth, copper, sweet jars that clink softly like polite guests waiting to be seated. For a moment the bundle hangs between them, heavier than either heart is ready to lift. And then, together, they take a corner each. The bundle has weight, not only of copper and cloth, but of questions everyone pretends not to ask out loud. The market can forgive a foolish poem. It cannot forgive an empty jar on a bad month. So the measuring begins in earnest, not of wrists and rings, but of days. Can he keep bread on the mat when the flood sulks and arrives low? When the fish forget to be caught? When the kill eats more wood than it should? Can she run a house the way a scribe runs a line? Steady hand, clean finish, no ink where it does not belong. Can their kin answer a knock without sighing? Reputation is a kind of dowry here. It cannot be counted on a papyrus, but everyone counts it anyway. Work speaks first. A man who comes home with dust in his hair and purpose in his step has already said something worth hearing. The neighbors know his mornings, whether his sandals leave before the shade moves, whether his tools are kept sharp, whether the foreman nods when he passes or stares past him into a better story. A woman's work is seen by those who matter most. The small eyes that will learn to watch her hands. The older women who judge with kindness sharpened by experience. Reed mats that unroll flat without a fight. Jars whose mouths are always covered. Lamps that never cough at dusk for lack of oil. These are announcements as clear as drums. Kin ties braid the rest. Cousins who can lend a shoulder during harvest. An uncle whose name travels ahead like shade in noon heat. An aunt who knows which seller cheats on weight, and which midwife's hands are sure. Good families are not perfect. They are reliable. They argue in the morning and bring bread by evening. They borrow a jar of beer and return it with dates swollen with honey. Speaking of which, basket dates sit open on a low table and let out their warm brown perfume while beer foams softly in the cool rim of a jar wrapped in damp cloth. Even the air understands this is a threshold day. The phrase people use for marriage is simple and exact: to found a house. It is not the language of fireworks. It is the language of mud and palm ribs and patience. The doorway matters more than any blessing said far away by a voice that does not know the names of the neighbors. Fresh plaster on the new threshold cures with that chalky, clean smell that makes the nose wrinkle and then want more. Someone has scored a line into it with a fingertip, a small fish, a zigzag of water, maybe the sign of a protective eye. Practical magic, not grand, just enough. Inside, rooms are smaller than dreams, but bigger than fear. Reed mats unroll with a soft hiss, the noise of a snake that has decided to behave. A small painted eye on a household god stares from a shelf like it is counting each object as it arrives. 1 bowl, 3 cups, a folded cloth with a stubborn crease that will give in if asked twice. A jar for grain sits where the wall stays coolest. A lesson learned by someone else and gifted without wrapping. On the floor by the doorway, sandals are lined in pairs with the care one usually saves for breakables. Pairs mean optimism. Pairs mean we expect to come back. Practical criteria have their own romance if looked at from close enough. A roof patched before the rain arrives is a love poem addressed to the future. A list of debts reduced to single lines is as sweet as a song when sung in the right room. Even the way the chest is packed reveals a kind of vow. Heavy things low, fragile things wrapped in cloth that still smells faintly of lotus oil. A cone tucked between a folded tunic and a ribbon of papyrus tied, so it will be easy to find tomorrow. These are not decorations. They are the grammar of living. There are formal words somewhere on a sheet, witnesses with ink on their fingers, promises that have teeth if someone forgets how to behave. Those guard the edges. What guards the center is plainer, a schedule that both can keep without resenting the clock that does not exist. Who rises first to stir the fire? Who checks the jar covers at night? Who remembers to tip the water from the rim so the mosquitoes do not write their own story in the dark? These questions do not sound grand at the threshold. They will matter more than gold. The neighbors linger because thresholds are interesting. They know this house will learn to new footsteps and must decide whether to echo them or trip them. Blessings are repeated in different shapes. An old man taps the door lintel and claims it will bring good luck if dust falls, and none does. A woman lays a date at the base of the grain jar. A child reaches for the painted eye and is gently turned, so the first touches to the mat instead. Small corrections like the keep our household from wobbling. Outside, the beer's foam sighs itself flat, and the smell leaves a sweetness that clings to the tongue of anyone who says welcome. Evening finds the chest half empty, which is to say, half full of tomorrows. The sandals wait in their neat pairs like patient animals. The mats have taken the shape of the floor and declared a truce. The plaster on the threshold has dried enough to accept feet without getting offended. The painted eye keeps watching without blinking because that is its only job. Somewhere in the back room, Dates sit in their basket and pretend not to know they are a celebration. There will be days when all this measuring will be tested. Floods sulk, kilns crack, a cousin forgets a debt and then forgets it again. On those days, the questions shift from can he provide to can they live. Not survive like animals, but live like people who have agreed on the meaning of spoons and the order of shelves. The answer will not come from a priest or a proclamation. It will come from the sound of a wooden chest being set down without breaking anything. From neighbors at the doorway who keep blessing even when the beer is gone. From the smell of fresh plaster reminding the room that it was made to be repaired. In the end, the house accepts the decision before the city does. It does not ask for signatures, it asks for footsteps. And so the moment that matters arrives without horns, a woman steps over a threshold, and the air notes her weight, her pace, the soft scrape of her soul against the plaster's new skin. By morning, the household will know her footfall the way a jar knows its lid. No priest, no proclamation, just the sound a life makes when it takes up a room. The house is founded. The mats lie flat. The sandals learn each other's place. Outside, the market resumes its soft surveillance, gossip moving like sand in a breeze, shaping dunes without raising dust. Names drift from mouth to mouth as if weighed for balance. Who is cousin to whom? Who married into which courtyard? Who crossed a line and pretended it was a shadow? In a clerk's booth near the granary, lamp smoke lifts in thin blue threads, while papyrus glue sweetens the air. The scribe recites lineages like a litany of kin, each branch a caution and a comfort. The acceptable is not a mystery here. It is a habit. Most marry within reach of their own river bend. Neighbors who know each other's harvests and timbers. Families that have swapped jars and favors for years. Endogamy feels less like a rule and more like gravity. It keeps property tidy, helps grandmothers remember whose child is whose, and ensures that if trouble arrives, it will be answered by people who know which door to pound at dawn. Cousin marriages thread the map like intentional knots. First cousins most of all, a bond that keeps inheritance from wandering off like a goat with bad manners. The scribe's reed taps each name and draws a line to another, the sound discreet as a heartbeat. Beyond those knots lie taboos that ordinary houses rarely test. In royal courtyards, the bloodlines curl back on themselves, sister to brother, even father to daughter, a theology of purity and throne nailed together with ceremony. Outside that rare air, such pairings are stories people tell with a grimace and an eye roll, like rumors about a neighbor's cat catching snakes. Most households are practical. They want their children healthy and their feasts free of whispers. When a match drifts too close to the forbiddance, the market voices thin out, and the scribe's pen slows as if it does not enjoy writing trouble. Yet the map has alleys. Sometimes a man from a priver arrives with good hands and a calm reputation, and a girl smiles in a way that suggests the rules might be elastic. The families bring charcoal and sketch trees on a courtyard wall. Who begets whom? Where branches overlap? Where space exists for a new shoot? Bracelets glint as they are exchanged in a trial of intentions. Copper warm from wrists passed from aunt to niece. from cousin to cousin, as if approval could be stored in metal. The river wind pushes a cool breath between mud brick and mat, thinning the day's heat long enough for someone to suggest an exception that still smells like scents. Lines in sand invite toes. A clerk's booth will not call itself a court, but its lamp has watched 100 families push at boundaries and then pull back with dignity intact. The scribe recites names again, this time slower, adding occupations, foremen who can vouch for character, midwives who can vouch for calm hands, neighbors whose doorways are close enough to hear when a quarrel rises and falls. Reputation is the red thread that keeps the drawing from unraveling. A man with steady work can stretch a boundary. A woman whose household runs like a well-tuned loom can ask the line to bend in her favor. Some ideals carry teeth even when not spoken. Monogamy is praised in Proverbs and enforced by economics. A second wife means double grain, double lump oil, double chances for resentment to breed in corners. Ordinary men do the math and choose peace. Ordinary women enshrine peace in the lines of a contract that finds foolishness before it happens. Extravagance in spouses belongs to palaces and to songs composed by people who do not have to sweep their own thresholds. Here, the acceptable remains simple: one roof to footsteps, one gossip chain that cannot be split without cost. Taboos outside royal circles arrive mostly as warnings dressed like jokes. Brother and sister is a king's problem, not a potter's. An uncle to his niece turns a room cold even in summer, a test no one volunteers to fail. The social body knows how to shiver in advance of a fever. Still, words like brother and sister float in love songs with meanings that are warmer and kinder, metaphors that say closeness rather than blood. The marketplace is clever enough to hear the difference, and the scribe does not record poems. Exceptions leave tracks. A cautious smile becomes a shared errand. A bracelet is worn to days in a row. A family tree gains a line that reaches further than custom prefers. If it holds, the alley becomes a street. In 3 seasons, everyone claims they always knew it would be fine. If it cracks, the clerk's booth smells of glue again, and lamp smoke writes shadows on the ceiling while penalty lines are drafted in precise, unromantic ink. The scribe does not blush. He has seen worse. He has also seen families repair themselves with clauses that feel like splints. In all this, ideals are not cages so much as fences with gates that creak open for those who bring reasons and responsibilities together. Endogamy holds property tight and keeps grandmothers content. Cousin links knit villages into nets that catch the unlucky before the river does. Taboos stand like boundary stones with gods carved into them, touched in passing, never kicked. And the quiet exceptions prove the rule by asking the community to check its memory, its math, its mercy. The market murmurs approval or disapproval with the volume turned low. Either way, the sand shifts under those who walk too fast. By evening, the clerk's booth dims, and the river breathes a wider, cooler wind into the alleys. Someone wipes the charcoal family tree from the wall with a damp cloth and redraws it smaller, neater, truer to the decision. Bracelets return to wrists with the calm authority of things that have been agreed. A pair of sandals sits side by side at a threshold, as if the day itself has taken a seat to watch the night arrive. Where love is allowed, it flowers. Where it is not, it learns to bloom in the cracks, and the cracks lead to contracts. The doorway has learned to footsteps. The mats have accepted a new pattern. The sandals sit in pairs like patient animals. What comes next is quieter and sharper. A room with a low table, a jar of ink thick with gum, and a reed nib that scratches like a cricket with good manners. Promises are warm when spoken in a courtyard. They are safest when written where the ink can hold them still. The scribe dips the nib, and the first line appears, neat as a braid, steady as a good roof. Somewhere in the back of the house, beeswax softens in the sun, its sweet breath drifting in to bless the business without being asked. On the table, tallies of linen stacked in careful piles, each edge aligned to the others like neighbors who have learned not to argue. A fingertip counts jars of grain the way a midwife counts breaths. 1, 2, 3, then back again to be sure. The list begins to live. Bolts of cloth, a chest that smells of cedar chips, bracelets that have been weighed and written by number rather than by pride. A contract is not romance. It is a safety net woven from specifics. Each knot says if we quarrel, if the river sulks, if a cousin forgets his debt and the month runs too long. The reed writes the ifs without apology. Witnesses clear their throats because their voices are the bridge between the spoken and the stored. They are neighbors, a foreman with dust at his cuffs, an aunt whose memory is so exact she can recite last year's date harvest to the jar. Their names go on the sheet like stones along a path, each one promising not to move when someone's foot needs a place to land. The scribe asks them to listen for the shape of fairness in the lines. Not favors, not flattery, fairness. The difference is the distance between a house that holds and a house that leaks. There is a word for the bride gift and for the provisions that will keep the kitchen honest. The bride gift is not a fee for a person. It is a promise that mornings will not have to borrow from evenings. It can be copper or silver, cloth or jars, a field share if the family is rich in dirt. It enters the contract like a calm animal. It will be named where it sleeps, who feeds it, how it returns if the gate must be opened again. The provisions are simpler, food and oil, and the ordinary coins of keeping life from fraying. The scribe writes these with a rhythm that makes the witnesses nod without noticing. Protection on separation is written with a steady hand that refuses to shake. If she leaves, her property goes with her. The cloth she brought, the bracelets, the jars, and if a bracelet has been sold, an equal value in silver is placed in its absence like a palm frond laid over a small wound. If he sends her away, he owes what he promised plus a fee that stings just enough to make a temper think twice. If quarrel becomes habit and habit becomes emptiness, the contract calms the room by telling each thing where to go. A house can release its grip and still keep its dignity if the paper has already rehearsed the parting. There is also the matter of joint goods. What was made together after the threshold learned to steps instead of one? The contract does not pretend those goods belong to one heartbeat more than the other. It speaks in portions that can be divided without calling down curses. To parts to one part is common, generous enough to honor a husband's heavier labor in fields and workshops, firm enough to honor a wife's relentless quiet work, the work that keeps lumps from coughing and grain from spoiling and children from learning to fear the dark. The witnesses listen. One clears his throat. Another taps a finger on the cedar chest like a seal waiting to be pressed. A seal is not loud. It clicks softly when it meets the warm beeswax, a syllable of finality without cruelty. The cord cinches the rolled papyrus with a small, decisive tug. The sound is for the household more than for the law. It says, the future has a shelf now, and on it sits a rolled promise that can be unrolled if memory fails or bad faith pretends to be forgetfulness. The shelf is high enough to be respected, low enough to be reached when needed. In a corner, a small painted eye watches from a household god, as if counting witnesses as carefully as grain. Why all this ink? Because speech is wind and kinship is weather, and even good neighbors can wake up wrong. Because a month can run long, because a ring can be lost, and a chest can be opened by fingers that are hungrier than they are honest. Paperwork matters for the same reason jar lids matter, to keep the sweet from attracting flies. The scribe knows this, the woman knows this, the man knows this, and does not pretend he does not. A promise is only as strong as the scribe who writes it, and the witnesses who nod while the ink is still wet. The reed nib scratches again, writing small teeth into the lines where penalties live. If he takes another wife without consent, if he squanders shared goods on someone else's feasts, if he raises a hand and thinks no one will record it because the night is kind to secrets, the contract sets a fine, a payment, a return of goods, a right to go with property intact. If she vanishes for months without word, if she sells shared goods without agreement, if she treats the household as a market stall and the market stall as a household, the penalties mirror each other like sandals lined at the door. The witnesses nod again. No one enjoys this. Everyone prefers that the seals sleep and never be disturbed. Sometimes a clerk copies a second version because paper has its own vulnerability. Fire, careless elbows, a rat with genealogical ambitions. The second copy lives in a chest that smells richly of cedar chips. The scent is a polite weapon against such ambitions. The chest itself is counted as property in the list, a reminder that even containers have to be protected from what they contain. The scribe has a little fun writing that line, a smile that he covers by dipping the nib again. The inventory is the contract's backbone. Linen by the bolt with edges that do not lie, jars of grain measured by fingertip to the first knuckle, bracelets weighed in the presence of someone who never counts wrong. Each item is a sentence in a language that thieves do not enjoy reading. It is tedious, which is why it works. Tedium is how a household avoids later drama. The scribe takes a long breath that tastes faintly of gum and smoke. He finishes the column and sets a small dot like a stone at the end of a path. The room has changed during all this. Ink dries in a sheen that will go dull in the next hour and stay forever. Beeswax gives up the last of its warmth and sits in the shade like a well-behaved guest. Outside, a neighbor coughs to remind his name to the scribe without being pushy. Inside, throats are cleared in the old way that says we have heard. We agree. We will repeat this if asked. The first seal clicks again for the second roll. The cord pulls tight, and the papyrus sighs the smallest sigh as if relieved to be a cylinder instead of a flutter. The couple signs in the way people here sign, not with boastful flourishes, but with names that have already fed many mornings. The woman's name is her own. It travels forward as it traveled in, wrapped now in new lines that recognize her property as a thing separate from her person yet loyal to it like a trained dog. The man's name sits beside hers, like a stool beside a jar. Useful, sturdy, not above being repaired. The scribe writes his own name small, because he is not the point, but still there, because he knows one day someone will want to know who made the ink decide the future. At the end, the scribe blows once across the last line. The sound is barely a sound, more a blessing disguised as breath. The witnesses stand, joints cracking like reeds in a light wind, and touch the seal with a fingertip as if heat could pass from finger to wax and keep the promise supple. The jar lids are checked, habit already doing what law requests. Outside, the courtyard smells of bread and the faint sting of plaster from a repair that dried this morning. Inside, the rolled contract goes to its shelf, cord neat, seal squared. Later, long after the scratches have faded from hearing and the ink has forgotten how to shine, the household moves around the paper without noticing it. Pots are set down gently, laughter spills into the room and out again. Quarrels rise and fall like small storms that wash the dust and leave everything cleaner. The papyrus does not mind being ignored. That is its job. It exists so that daily life can forget to be afraid. If fear returns, the shelf is there, the cord is there, the wax will break with a soft, unfrightening sound. The papyrus dries, the ink fixes, the future, for now, sits quietly on a shelf and watches the kitchen. The rolled papyrus rests on its shelf, the cord neat, the wax untroubled. In the rooms below it, life begins to speak in smaller voices. Quernstones some like tame thunder, as a handful of barley turns to flower between to patient circles of stone. A child laughs under the palm in the courtyard, a sound that jumps like light on water, and then settles back into shade. The day has already divided itself, errands for one pair of feet, half for another, both belonging to the same promise that was written yesterday and is being kept today by habit more than law. Bread is the first argument the house wins together. Barley mash sweats gently in a clay bowl, coriander crushed between fingers until the air warms with green spice. A strip of dough is slapped against the wall of a hot pot. It clings. It swells. It browns. It releases with a soft sigh that makes even tired people kinda Clothes are beaten and rinsed and spread over a rope where the sun behaves like a quiet servant. The smell of laundry drying is a message no scribe needs to write. This place is being cared for. Work divides without fanfare. He leaves early with tools wrapped in cloth to keep the edges where they belong. Returns when the light has gone honey-colored and the dust has learned to sit. She measures mornings by water carried and fires coaxed, and small hands redirected from danger to usefulness. In better months there is time to talk while cutting greens. In meaner months there is time to nod and share silence that does not bruise. The rhythm is not equal every day. It is fair over many days. Fairness is how affection chooses to dress in places where poetry has dishes to wash. Children edge in and out of the work like sparrows. One learns to grind a small measure on a toy quern beside the real one, the hum of stone teaching patience without scolding. Another learns to carry water with two hands and not slosh the good coolness out onto the floor, where only dust will drink it. When a fever comes, the household pauses as if the sun itself held a breath. A palm settles against a hot brow. Oil glistens on the wrist. A quiet prayer moves through the room like a draught that has been invited to stay. The contract on the shelf cannot cure a fever, but it can make sure the firewood is there when the night grows long. Meals are small and correct more often than they are grand and forgetful. Beer is ladled from the jar with a careful hand so the foam does not waste itself on the floor. Bread returns from the wall of the pot blistered and proud. On lucky days there is a fish that tastes like the river learned a song. On ordinary days onions and a story do the same job. They eat facing each other because it is simpler to pass things that way. The smallest hand is checked before the first bite for dirt and mischief. The largest hand pretends not to see the extra fig, but has already found a certain mouth. Afternoon is a seam. Cord is twisted. Sandals are retied. A lamp is trimmed even though the sun has not yet asked for help. A cool jar is lifted from the corner where heat forgets to go. The smell when the stopper comes away is clean as a line drawn straight. The floor is swept with a palm-frond broom that remembers being alive. The child under the courtyard palm laughs again, and then falls quiet in the way that means sleep has struck like a kind thief. Someone moves a reed mat just far enough to shade a face, and then steps away on the edges of their feet. Evening finds the house counting itself. Tools back to their places. Lids settled on jars with a gentle click a household learns to love. The headrest is adjusted in the dark by fingers that know the exact angle where the neck forgives the day. A lamp flame is cupped from the draught, the hand curved like a small wall that cares. A bruise mentions itself and is ignored with a smile that says tomorrow we will speak to it properly with rest and a cooler task. The quern is silent now. The room hums with the soft work of insects stitching the dark back together after daylight's tearing. Chores do not end so much as change color. Threads are counted. Hems are argued into straightness. A jar of lentils is poured into a bowl and back again simply to listen for the sound of stones that do not belong. Good order makes a soft music that only people who live together can hear. They learn each other's footfalls the way jars learn their lids and doors learn which threshold boards will complain if stepped on with full weight. The child wakes once and is soothed by a voice that has practiced being a shoreline, steady, repeating, a promise of return. Affection here does not need trumpets. It is the pieces of fish set aside without being asked, the cool water offered before the question finishes leaving a mouth, the wool spread near the doorway so morning feet do not greet stone like an enemy. It is a joke told at the exact moment when mending goes wrong and a rip becomes a lesson, laughter used as thread. It is the way a hand will rest on a shoulder for no reason a clerk can list and every reason a life can notice. If outsiders were to ask where love is kept, the answer would point to the boring places, the shelf with the bowls, the corner where the broom lives, the quiet edge of the bed where someone sits until a nightmare loses its teeth. Some nights the roof hears small plans. Tomorrow the boats will come if the wind is honest. Tomorrow the neighbor's daughter can be asked to carry a message to her aunt who knows the midwife whose hands are sure. Tomorrow the child will be told yes about something that has received too many no's. Even plans this small need to be said aloud so the house can hold them. The lamp listens and throws their words up against the wall where they look ridiculous and therefore safe. Sleep is a negotiation every house learns differently. The woven headrest is turned to the cooler side. A shoulder is folded under like a wing. A last check is made on the cooling embers and the lid that keeps the night creatures from helping themselves. Outside, crickets and cousins hum their layered opinions. Inside, breath finds its own pattern, out of step at first, then sympathetic. The old duet that marriage keeps relearning until it can be sung even when one voice is away for a night. The contract on the shelf says nothing about this, which is why it works. The paper guards the edges so the center can hum without thinking of edges at all. When the day ends well, the bowls are empty and no one is ashamed of the emptiness. A clean bowl promises as loudly as a full one. The lamp is pinched out with care because tomorrow will need the oil. The last sound is not a prayer exactly, and not a prayer. A soft thanks to the stone that gave less trouble, to the fish that came quietly to hand, to the child who returned from fever with a cooler brow. The last smell is the laundry that finished drying and was taken in before the night could steal its warmth. The day closes on empty bowls and full hearts. Tomorrow will use the same bowls for a new kind of hunger. Morning stretches into a day with edges of celebration. The courtyard swept twice, the lintel wiped and wreathed with palm. The household god given a dab of fresh oil, so the painted eye looks properly awake. By afternoon, laughter rises and falls like river light, where the alleys widen. Neighbors wash their hands in perfume water, and children practice being taller than they are by walking in pairs. Farther off, sistrums begin to ring, metal tongues flicking the air with a bright chatter that sounds like sunlight shaken loose. The house dresses itself, not with riches, but with readiness to be seen. Festivals are permission slips for joy, also for scrutiny. Perfume cones melt into hair and release sweetness that rides the heat like a polite guest who knows when to speak. Roasted goose smoke drifts past doorways and persuades even the cautious to step outside and smile with their whole faces. Incense curls from a shrine niche, thin and certain, a line drawn between ordinary hours and sanctioned delight. Hands joined before the household god for a breath and a promise, not because the god has forgotten, but because people like to hear themselves say out loud what they plan to keep. Community arrives with jokes and checks. A wreath is set on the lintel by a neighbor whose opinion matters more than the cost of the wreath. A cousin brings a jar and a story, and both are shared by everyone within reach. Music runs down the street in little bursts, drummers testing their wrists, singers testing who knows the third verse without cheating. Names fold into the sound, not shouted, spoken. A hush when a certain name is said tells the rest of the room how to feel about a rumor, what to ignore, what to watch. Reputation travels this way, not on papyrus, on breath and eyebrows. Private vows put on sandals and walk among public glances. Eyes measure how a hand lingers when passing bread, how a shoulder tilts toward the wrong laugh. How do people choose the same corner twice? One look lingers too long and says too much. It is small as a thread and bright as a fish, and half the street sees it without trying. Most of the time, the look is a mistake, and the festival is a cure, a family's proximity stitching a tear before it becomes a whole. Sometimes the look is not a mistake, and the street files the knowledge where such things are kept, not forgotten, not yet used. Expectations of loyalty are soft law with hard edges. A husband who treats the feast like a market for new appetites will find the music thinner the next time he walks through it. A wife who sharpens kindness for someone else's doorway will notice how jokes stop a beat too soon when she approaches. No proclamations, no priests pointing, just the warm water of the community cooling a degree at a time. People in Egypt do not need to raise their voices to make a rule loud. They change which doorways offer shade. But joy is not a trap. It is a practice. Couples sit near each other on festival days where the street can see how they speak with their hands when words are busy. A palm rests on a knee. A cup is filled before it is asked for. A crumb is brushed from a cheek without ceremony. Children sleep across laps in messy diagonals while the music steps lightly around them. At the shrine, fingers touch the lintel and then each other, an exchange as old as heat, humble and complete. These gestures are not for show. They are for survival. Public proof of private promises in a world that believes what it watches. There are boundaries everyone understands without maps. Do not vanish from your own house for nights that cannot be explained by work or weather. Do not spend shared grain on someone else's better laughter. Do not insult a spouse with absence while pretending the god will not notice because the drums are loud. The teachings know how to be gentle and exact at once. Honor your house. Keep your wife fed and cheerful. Be clear with your husband and refuse to let bitterness make a bed in the kitchen. The crowd repeats these lessons in a dozen softer ways. An aunt's arched brow, a friend's hand that squeezes once and lets go. When betrayal arrives, it does not crash the gate. It dusts the threshold and waits. First the jokes sharpen, then the invitations thin. Then the scribe's booth seems closer than it used to be, and the smell of papyrus glue makes a kind of sense. Laughter still rises and falls like river light, but certain names cause that beautiful hush, not reverent, wary. In a corner, incense smolders in a little clay cup and decides it is tired of being graceful. Reputation tightens its belt and looks for a chair where it can sit and be counted. Not all slips are doom. A look is noticed, a talk is had, a wreath on the lintel is straightened by hands that have straightened worse. The next day, bread is broken at the right table, and the street decides to forgive by not mentioning what it remembers. This is also law, soft, effective, the kind that lets a house live longer than a mistake. The festival's music carries that forgiveness to the corner and back again until it sounds like it always belonged there. Yet some cracks widen. Then the quiet insurance wakes up. In the next room, not sulking, not gloating, a rolled papyrus waits with beeswax that will soften under a thumb and a cord that will tighten when pulled. The paperwork is not romance, but it was written by people who understood that hearts cannot be audited and reputations have their own weather. A seal does not ring like a sistrum. It clicks. The click is small and wholly in a different register. It says, joy is sanctioned. Betrayal is not. And should the music falter beyond repair, there is a sentence waiting that knows where each bowl goes. The street remembers laughter. The wreath has browned on the lintel, and the lumped soot has been wiped from the shrine niche. What remains is quieter, a room with chairs brought close, and a measured voice reading terms that were once written in cooler weather. A reed nib does not sing today. It only points while a finger follows the old lines. The clauses are a thread through a knot, and the only way to undo a knot without tearing the cord is to follow the thread back to where it began. Divorce arrives in Egypt like a sentence spoken carefully, not like a door kicked in. Either may speak it. The husband with a formal "I leave you as my wife" and "I have no demand." The wife with an equal formula that opens the same gate. The difference is not who is allowed. It is who is ready to settle what was promised on the day clay first dried over a threshold. The contract becomes a map. Bride gift noted, property listed, penalties written in teeth that still bite politely. A measured voice reads, witnesses clear throats in the old rhythm that says we have heard. We agree. We will say it again if asked. Goods divide first because they are obedient. What she brought returns to her. What he promised is paid, or a schedule is set that binds into jars and bolts until the number is satisfied. What was made together is weighed on the balance the contract already named. 2 parts to 1 part is common, though families can argue themselves into other shapes if fairness and face both feel served. Names are crossed with a careful stroke beside items that have chosen their new shelf, bracelets unfastened and placed on a cloth, jars counted by fingertip, linen tallied to the last edge. The soft thump of a chest repacked sounds like a heart deciding to keep time. Children are not counted like bowls and never written in copper. Where they go follows work, milk, age, and mercy more than law as we would name it. The smallest usually stays where milk and hands are, with the mother, if her roof is sound and her mornings known to be steady. Older ones may move where tools are, with the father, if his door can turn grain into lessons and clothes into seasons. Can lean in here, a grandmother with a bed, an aunt with room at her table, an uncle whose courtyard is known to be gentle with noise. The measured voice hesitates over these lines because tenderness does not enjoy being read aloud. Witnesses attend the ending as they attended the beginning, fewer this time, but not casual. They watch goods find owners and words find gentler words to sit beside. They watch the door hinge take its last negotiation and then accept the verdict of oil and habit. They do not cheer and they do not judge aloud. One clears a throat when the measured voice goes hoarse. Another lifts a chest's other handle without being asked and sets it down with a grunt that startles a bird on the wall beam. The sound is not loud. It is decisive. Remarriage is not barred by ghosts in Egypt, only by arithmetic. A man announces his settlement before a citizen's bench or a clerk, dividing the 2/3 against the 1/3, so the past does not leak into the future. A woman walks out with her name intact and property wrapped in cloth she chose herself. She is free to marry again when the ink admits that obligation has been put to bed. The old papyrus may be returned, its obligations cancelled by payment, or copied and archived like a weather report that tells the new month whether it must prepare for rain. And then there is the smallest rite, the one no scribe writes. The household god is not moved. It is a house's memory and does not travel well, but it is turned slightly from the room that held many bowls to the smaller room that will hold fewer. The painted eye looks at a narrower patch of air and agrees to keep watch anyway. A key waits on the sill until it is taken by the right hand or by none. The hinge decides to be quiet for once. The measured voice stops reading. The chest stays shut. The house breathes once and resumes. The chairs are still close, but there is a space between them now. Not for a person, for a silence that everyone agrees to carry. Condolence murmurs gather at the doorway, soft and repetitive, like hands smoothing a sheet that will not lie flat. Inside, someone moves the ledger forward on the table and slides a small bowl of account beads near the corner. The dry rattle as they touch tells the room that affection will be measured along with everything else, because bread must continue whether or not speech can. River birds begin calling at first light. The sound a clean seam where night gives up the work and day takes it gently. Widowhood in this place is not a disappearance. It is a rearrangement. Linen is washed and rehung. The smell of water and sun letting the house know that the tasks still remember their order. Myrrh is rubbed at the wrists before visitors arrive, not to hide grief, to give it a dignified scent. The chair he sat in remains at meals, left vacant for a time, a witness without a mouth. A ring that once rested on a finger is passed to a cord and worn at the throat, The circle kept, the weight moved. She traces his name in dust on the table's edge with a fingertip and then wipes it clear so the surface can be useful again. This is mourning here, tenderness with a broom in its hand. Protection begins with what the two built together. The share the household law has long spoken about in simple fractions. One portion that is hers by custom, not by favor, already hers while he lived, steady through divorce or death. To portions that align with children, if there are children, a store kept by guardianship until small hands become large enough to open jars without spilling. If there are no children, kinship lines wake like old paths. Brothers and sisters step forward as contenders unless his written word says otherwise. A paper can tighten the knot around a widow's claim when the street grows noisy. In this city, grief learns early to love ink. Inheritance prefers clarity. Children before siblings, elder before younger, when the choice is within one kind. The eldest son is the easy figure for many houses, not because girls are silent, because the rules favor a clean ledger line and boys were named first in it. Yet daughters can be named the principal heir when sons do not exist, or when a will says what love already decided. Widows do not vanish behind another man's name to stand in this line. Their own property stands with them. Their share of the joint goods remains theirs. Their dowry stays loyal like a well-trained dog that sits where it is told and bites only paper. If the will is thoughtful, it appoints her steward and sole heir when children are absent, with a note that after her days, the goods travel to the next generation's hands without quarrel. Remarriage is not a betrayal of the dead. It is a repair to the living. The talk begins in the quiet season after the first ceremonies fade and the clean emptiness after incense curls up and is gone. Neighbors bring small errands first, then larger ones, a roof to patch, a measure of barley to exchange, a child to help with a stubborn knot. The house learns what it can do alone and what will break if it tries. When it is time to speak of another pair of footsteps, the ledger opens on a different page, her property listed straightforwardly, his promises stated to respect what came before. No one asks her to forget. They ask her to measure. The account beads rattle softly and then go still. The social fabric does the rest, one thread at a time. Women sit on the roof at dusk and retie the day. Advice without orders, memories without traps. Men stand in the shade and count costs out loud so no one is surprised later. Children learn what it means to step softly past a vacant chair and to ask whether it should remain vacant or be moved to the courtyard for a night breeze. A wreath appears on the lintel again, plainer than last festival, more beautiful for that. The household god is offered a lamp with a smaller flame. The painted eye understands economy and does not complain. There are accounts that no clerk boasts. The cost of winter, without his hands on the kindling. The way the jar is heavier now because there is no one to lift with. The lane at night that sounds different when one set of sandals is missing from it. Grief's arithmetic is stubborn. It insists on both columns, tears and grain. It insists the child's shoes be measured when the moon is new. It insists the oil be rationed so the lamp can hum at bedtime Without being asked twice, the widow learns to hear the house differently. Hinges speak louder. The quernstone sings more slowly under a single set of arms. She learns where help lives. The aunt with a spare morning, the neighbor boy with stronger wrists, the scribe who will copy a clause without charging more than pride can pay. The law offers its own kindness. Arrears can be claimed if promises made to her in earlier papers were not fully paid before death. She can present the old contract, and its teeth will still bite, even into a grave that no longer answers. If he has written a will naming her steward of all goods, that paper goes to the front of the pile, and the names on other sheets become quiet. If he has not, she stands with her share, and her children's share as a shield, enough to keep the hearth from going cold if the rest must be argued among uncles. A measured voice reads terms in the low room again. This time the sound is gentler, like cloth turned and folded rather than cut. Morning returns with its ordinary demands. River birds call, and the courtyard answers by lifting buckets, by setting grain aside for grinding, by checking the jar lids with the same patient fingers as before. She sets a chair where he sat and decides whether today it remains empty or receives a basket of mending to keep the shape without the ache. She ties the ring at her throat to the cord twice, then tests the knot, then lets it rest against her skin, where it grows warm and behaves itself. Myrrh at the wrist, because some rituals must not be neglected. Linen rehung, because the scent of sun is a kind of courage. The talk of remarriage does not cancel mourning. It rereads it. What does this house need? The same answer as always: bread, safety, a hand to soothe the fever at midnight, a voice to laugh at the wrong time so the right time remembers to come. A man arrives with steady work and slower jokes, or no man arrives, and the aunts arrive instead with baskets and opinions that can build a wall and a roof in a week. Either way, the paper will be unrolled and a new set of numbers will be written to keep fear small enough to step over. The festival wreath will be chosen together, not for show, for scent. Children will be told first truths and then kinder truths, and will learn to braid them without breaking either. By evening, the condolence murmurs at the doorway have thinned. The account beads are pushed to the back of the table, where they do not have to rattle unless asked. Incense has burned and left a sweetness that is now only memory. The room smells clean and empty of smoke, which is a different comfort. The vacant chair holds a folded cloth as if it had never been anything but useful. The ledgers are closed and slid back into their chest, cedar breath rising like a blessing no god will argue. The ledger closes, the morning opens. Grief makes room for new footsteps on the same threshold. The courtyard is hot enough to making curry. The quill's cut gives off a faint copper tang that clings to the mouth like a warning. A bench is pulled into shade. A witness coughs to remind the room of his name without vanity, and a magistrate's ring taps would once, twice, not to threaten, but to measure silence. What follows is not thunder. It is dust settling while a clerk reads a line about a promise that forgot how to keep itself. Infidelity arrives in 3 pieces: rumor, proof, and price. Rumor is the market's music turned sharp, eyes that watched too well, a look that lingered too long, a name that hushes a doorway when spoken aloud. Proof is cold and reluctant, a witness who saw enough, a letter that should have burned, a bracelet that returned smelling wrong. Price is older than anger, a fine paid into a bowl one coin at a time, so the sound can teach humility to hands that needed it yesterday. Sometimes the bowl is silver. Sometimes it is clay. The lesson is the same. Clauses in papyrus know how to bare their teeth without shouting. If a spouse was unfaithful, the guilty party forfeits a share of the joint goods that would have followed them out the door. If the betrayal drained shared stores, repayment is not poetry. It is grain and cloth and oil counted back until the bruise fades from the numbers. If the home was abandoned without cause, a schedule of penalties begins to tick in neat ink. Each missed month another rind peeled from the guilty one's pride. The magistrate's ring taps would again, not louder, slower, like a drum reminding dancers where the step goes. There are stranger corners where the law keeps odd tools. Sandals can be surrendered as a symbol when a man fails to keep a promise and chooses to keep his mouth instead. An amulet is removed and set aside on the table when a woman swears by a god she would rather not disappoint twice. A small bowl receives a measured heap of barley that is not payment exactly, but public contrition, a pantry blessing reversed, and then re-earned. These gestures seem theatrical until the street repeats them in smaller versions. A wreath not placed on a lintel this festival. A jar not refilled by a neighbor who always refilled it before. Abandonment is the quietest crime, and therefore the one papyrus grips hardest. If a roof sits empty of the footsteps that promised to return, ink grows very patient and very precise. Missed maintenance becomes arrears. Arrears become seizure. Seizure becomes a chest repacked without malice. The hinge negotiates once, then twice, then learns the new habit of closing. Children do not go into bowls or ledgers, yet the clauses still circle them with care. Who carries whom to the healer? Who receives the winter sandals first? Who has the right to speak for a fever at midnight? Odd clauses tell on a culture more than grand speeches do. Some papers forbid bringing an outsider to sleep under the same roof upon pain of losing oil and grain for a season. Some require that a runaway spouse stand in a doorway at noon and hear the magistrates ring tap wood while the neighbors watch without laughing. One line, old and stubborn, says this plainly: do not spend shared wealth to sweeten another house. The penalty is not a sermon. It is repayment with a little extra, enough to make mischief feel overpriced next time. Social punishments are gentler and more enduring than fines. A festival wreath is set on a lintel with the leaves turned the wrong way. Everyone notices, and no one explains. A song pauses on a name, and the sistrums stop ringing for the beat it takes to breathe. Laughter rises and falls like river light, but does not cross a certain threshold until the apology is counted into a bowl or the clause is met in full. Reputation is a soft law with a long memory. It travels faster than papyrus and arrives earlier than regret. Still, the law can be merciful in its arithmetic. A first offense paid promptly will be allowed to evaporate like spilled beer under noon heat. A return to duty, bread, oil, presents, decent speech, earns back the shade of doorways quicker than anyone will admit aloud. A clerk will copy the settlement with ink thinned so it dries to fast to smudge. The blotches look like tears and nobody comments. The magistrate's ring taps wood for the last time and then lies quiet, heavy, and bored, while the room remembers how to be a room and not a court. And there are the truly odd cases that become stories. A woman who wrote into her contract that her husband must not sell the headrest she loved, on pain of buying two new ones and sleeping without either until they arrived. A man who swore to carry water himself every third day in the flood season, and when he did not, the witnesses came to watch him carry double in the sun while they counted aloud like children at a game. An amulet promised to a god if a promise was kept, later found on a shelf when the promise was not. The clerk did not write that last part, the street did. In all this, the exception proves the papyrus. Strange rules, peculiar fines, sandals on a bench, amulets blinking on wood. They reveal what sits under the ink. Fidelity is not only romance, it is logistics. Abandonment is not only absence, it is hunger. A clause about barley is a love letter that refuses to be embarrassed by using numbers instead of adjectives. A verdict settles like silt in a canal, slowly, completely. The water runs clearer once it is done. At the end, what cannot be mended is measured. What is measured can be carried. What is carried in time grows lighter. The witness coughs once more as if to fold the day closed. The magistrate's ring rests. The ink on the clerk's fingers dries into a map of lines that will wash away by morning. Outside, hot stone exudes the last of the noon heat, and the house exhales. In the next room, bread will be broken or not. A lamp will be shielded from the draught, devotion with 2 fingers and a palm. A key will be set on a sill where the moon can see it. The household god is not moved, only turned slightly to face a smaller room.